if we are full of awe and we approach it from the perspective, the mindset of wonder. Wonder's definition is curious and investigative. In other words, an adventure. That's what I mean when I say from a takeaway of this is to prepare to be awful, full of awe. And if you prepare to be full of awe, events are going to happen. Tomorrow is going to happen, whether you want it to or not, whether you think about it, whether you intentionally go, tomorrow is coming. Those changes are coming. They're headed down the pipeline, and yet you have a choice. First of all, acknowledge you have the choice. Prepare to be awful. The choice you have to make is fear or wonder. Welcome to The Maintenance Mindset, an audio video podcast brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Paul Rhodes, and over the more than 3 decades in the apartment industry, I've had roles that include being on site, providing services as a vendor, creating and delivering multiple education programs, and active association work. This podcast is centered on the often overlooked role that our on-site maintenance workers play. You know, the men and women that respond in the middle of the night to the toilet call, or the after hours, it's really, really hot in my apartment request, or my favorite, my ring fell down the drain, get over here now. In other words, the often unsung heroes who are responsible for asset preservation and resident satisfaction. Working in multifamily maintenance provides interesting, sometimes amusing, and often fascinating stories and viewpoints. My encouragement to you is this: whatever you do it with a maintenance mindset. Hey there. Recently, I've been intrigued by a quote that I ran across in a book that I was reading somewhere. And I don't think the book is as interesting as this quote because of the thought that it inspired. Now, the quote is by Eric Hoffer. And what it says is, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with the world that no longer exists. Now, that has really gotten my mental juices flowing, because on our communities, if we're providing maintenance, meaning we are maintaining our residents, we're maintaining the property, we're maintaining our relationships, we're maintaining vendors, we're maintaining our accounting, our acquisition and dispositions. If we are maintaining all of those things all at once, are we learning or are we learned? Meaning, are we just trying to figure out yesterday over and over again, even though tomorrow is going to come? You see, how this has been working through my brain has been a couple of things, and it boils down to one question: is your community changing? If it's not changing, then you can go about doing everything that you did yesterday forever, because what you did yesterday apparently worked. Apparently it succeeded. If your property is not changing, maybe I should rephrase this. If you say your property, your community is not changing, then I'm going to challenge you to take another look, because my supposition is that we need to be learners. And because our property continuously changes, we have got to deal with the unknown that is tomorrow. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we can look at this. Regular listeners will understand when I use the type of language of a frame. I believe that if we look at the same topic from different viewpoints, it will allow us to think through whatever it is we're trying to look at in different ways and come up with solutions that we wouldn't have come up with under normal circumstances. And in this case, whether we're learning or we're learned, whether we're looking forward to the unknowable tomorrow or we're just relying on what we did yesterday, I think the frames we need to look at this are from our property and from our residence. And by that, the property, I mean the physical asset. If we are looking at things from the viewpoint of the physical asset, it will give us or end up providing for us different answers than had we looked at our property through the frame of our residence. And you see, I firmly believe that our properties are changing. They are going through uh, challenges, successes. They're going through different things all the time. And if we focus on these two frames, the frame of the asset and the frame of our resident, then we're going to get some different ideas on how we need to go about learning. I mean, it all boils down to the fact that, yes, our properties are changing. Even if your property looks the same as it did yesterday, it's changing for no other reason than the law of entropy. You see, entropy states that everything will go from a state of order to a state of chaos unless there is extra energy that's brought into it. If we are approaching our physical building by the way that we approached it yesterday, meaning we do only the same thing that we did yesterday, then because of entropy and the fact that today our building is a little bit different than it was yesterday, then we're missing something. Something has changed from yesterday to today. That's the frame of the building that we've got to be sure that we are dealing with. If we're dealing with the frame of our resident, where when we begin talking about changes, well, our residents suffer from entropy as well. This can be summarized by the song from the 80s, "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" And our residents, chances are they're saying that regularly and frequently. If not out loud, at least they're saying it in their mind. Early on in my speaking career, a mentor of mine gave me the WIFM model. And what that is, WIFM is an acronym, and it stands for What's in It for Me. And basically, as a speaker, as a presenter, what he told me to do is imagine, if you will, on every single person's forehead in your audience, they have WIFM tattooed across their forehead because you are taking their time. In other words, I'm up on stage, I am taking their time, and they are constantly asking, what is in this time that you're taking for me? Our residents are that exact same thing. When residents call in and notify us of a need, what's in it for them is identifying that they had a need, correcting their need within a reasonable amount of time. And if we don't correct it, at the very least, we validate that they gave us a need and we tell them the plan that we're going to do to solve that need. In both cases, if we treat those situations just like we did yesterday, the property and our resident who's looking for what we did for them last, if we continue to do what we did yesterday, if we continue to apply the lessons that we only applied and learned yesterday, then we've already lost. We may just not see it yet. Because you see, where entropy is concerned, that inexorable march that continues to go towards chaos happens in very, very small steps over time. How many of you at your community in a vacant apartment, when you go look at that vacant apartment, do you see a little itty bitty, teeny tiny crack in the corner of the wall or in between, like the room I'm in right now, up against that ceiling and wall behind me? Those cracks, they're just small. They're not structural in nature. Matter of fact, a lot of time, all that crack is just where the joint compound has dried out and split just a little bit. It's not a big deal. It's not leaking. It's not a structural issue. It's just there. And you know what? If anything, it proves that this is a real building in real life and real world. This is not computer generated perfection. However, if we do nothing about that crack, our building begins to break down. Eventually, the paper behind that joint compound is going to fail. That is going to allow air and moisture to get into that crack, into that corner. And over time, that air and moisture that gets in there is going to begin to cause the wooden studs behind the wall to deteriorate. Now, again, that little itty bitty crack that you see right there, it's not that big of a deal. But if we do nothing, because, yesterday we did nothing, we learned that if we do nothing, that little itty bitty crack will get to tomorrow. And it'll still be a little itty bitty crack. No harm, no foul, nothing done. However, as we discussed, the physical building over time is going to begin to break down. But that's the building frame. What about the resident? The resident that moves in with that little itty bitty crack there because for whatever reason we didn't fix it during the turns process. When that resident gets in there, they see that little itty bitty crack and maybe it even registers as a little thing that's something there. They may or may not write it down on their move-in inspection form. But over time, that little itty bitty crack is just there. If through the changing of the seasons, that crack gets wider or that crack gets narrower, your resident who is in that apartment every single day, chances are they're going to notice it at some point. And when, by their perception, something happened that they don't exactly agree with, that little itty bitty crack will head towards the production of chaos for our resident. Now, what am I advocating for with these two frames? Well, I think I'm advocating for the fact that if we try and solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's solutions, we're not going to succeed in the role of maintenance. This is an advocacy for us to be what Einstein says is to maintain a holy curiosity. Now, if you've listened to the Maintenance Mindset Minute, one of my most favoriteest quotes, and one that I repeat quite frequently, is by Albert Einstein. And it talks about never losing a holy curiosity, because curiosity should be approached with reverence, with a level of concern that is above just noticing. This is something that almost takes a religious appeal. And let me give you an example of this. How many of us on our communities, when we go to do any task that is maintenance related, we have a checklist? Quite frequently, the one I will talk about most is a turns or a make-ready maintenance checklist. This is frequently a spreadsheet that somebody has put into a checkbox format of items that we need to ensure that we go over in a vacant apartment And this documentation, old school, was used in paper as proof that we double checked everything in the property. Now, I can understand when we're looking at a vacant apartment, there's an awful lot of things to remember. And from that sense, I'm a fan of checklists. They're good places to start, but they're not good places to live. You know, bringing onboarding a new employee, checklists are brilliant. They help us ensure that we cover everything, but actually that's a problem. A make-ready checklist for a new employee, does it actually cover everything? This is my problem with checklists. You see, years ago, we acquired a property in Houston, Texas. And this particular property, it had 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. Now, it's an apartment, had kitchen, 3 bathrooms, a living room, a dining room area, and 4 bedrooms. It had 3 bathrooms. Some of the units on this particular property even had garages. Here's the problem. We took this over, and we, as a management company, we had a turns checklist, a make-ready checklist that was used by the maintenance team when they went into an apartment to remind them or to validate the fact that they checked everything in the apartment. The problem that we had is we took this property over. It's got an extra bedroom that wasn't covered on our checklist. It has an extra bathroom, and some of the units had garages. So we took it over. At this particular time, we had the ability to bring over a property manager, a leasing person, and 2 maintenance people from other properties in that local area to help assist the new maintenance team who was hired for that property to get on board with our program, with our policies, with our procedures. The problem was our existing maintenance technicians, though they were used to using the turns checklist on their community, all they knew was that checklist. All they knew was to go through the unit, and yes, they followed at that proper management company. We followed a process called knob to hinge, which is where when you came into the apartment, you followed the knob side. So for instance, this particular door I'm standing next to, the knob is on the right-hand side. That meant for this apartment, I would begin right there and go all the way around the apartment to get back to the hinge side of the door. That was our process. The nice thing about doing that process is some apartments you had the knob on the right-hand side, other apartments you had the knob on the left-hand side. So it provided a little bit of variety, but we were assured that everything was checked and looked at. And then while the technician went through following the knob to hinge process, they would do the checks on that checklist as they came to them. I got a call from this maintenance technician who was helping out at the new property, and he called and said, "Hey, Paul, I've got a problem. This checklist only has 3 bedrooms and we got 4, and it only has 2 bathrooms and we have 3. And the unit I'm in right now, it has a garage. Where do I check that?" I asked him, "What do you think needs to happen?" He immediately, without even thinking anything else, he replied, "We need a new checklist." I said, "Okay, a new checklist might be a good idea. Who's going to make the checklist?" "Well, you are." "No, I'm out in the field. I happen to be in a different state at the time. I can't make the checklist. And that apartment has got to get ready, like all make-ready apartments. It's got to get ready yesterday." He replied back, he goes, "Well, what am I going to do?" I asked him, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I've never done this before." And there was a long pause. "Well, I guess I could take another one and just write on it so that I've got the checklist there." I said, "Yes, there you go. You have found a solution to your problem right then and there. And you had to think beyond what you did yesterday." He went on and began doing that at that property, at that community. And then after a little bit of time, he went and created a new checklist. But you see, he did catch the first part of the lesson in my mind, but he missed the second part of the lesson. The first part of the lesson is a checklist is just a starting point. If the only thing that we are ever doing our jobs by is a checklist, then we are going to miss things. And it's justifiable that we miss things because it wasn't on the list. I didn't bring it home. Slight diversion. My wife and I have a joke. Whenever I need to go to the store, my wife will start listing off things that we need to pick up. And early on in our marriage, it became quite clear that if it's more than two things that I need to remember to get from the store, it's a list. I need to have a list. And then it also became quite clear that if it's not on the list, I'm just not going to get it because I need a list for shopping items. And yet there are times when, for instance, here 2 weeks ago, we were going to make Caesar salad. And there was a romaine lettuce and the dressing and the Parmesan and Asiago cheese on the list, but there was no croutons on the list. Had I just followed the list completely and totally, we couldn't have had the preferred method of having Caesar salad. Somewhere along that list, I got curious and thought beyond the list, and I ended up getting croutons, and I was the hero because I thought outside of yesterday's solution. Our make ready checklist, our maintenance technicians, when they go into a vacant apartment, if they are only doing things by the checklist, anything that is missed, it's not on the checklist, they get an excuse if you are only applying yesterday's challenge. So the lesson here, the takeaway here is that if we are operating our communities based on yesterday's solution, we're never, ever going to solve tomorrow's problems. In other words, we will be finding ourselves beautifully equipped to deal in a world that no longer exists. Checklists, I have a love-hate relationship. You may have figured that out by now. I believe checklists are a great place to start. Property leaders, if you are handing checklists to your employees for things that they need to do, ensure that your employees understand that the checklist is a starting place. This gives us the methodology that we need to begin with for problem solving. If I'm using a checklist on my building to go through and perform specific tasks, chances are there's a liability reason why that checklist exists. But don't forget to go beyond the checklist, because we want to foster employees that will do exactly that. They will identify the problem that has never heretofore been seen before at this community. For our residents, if you have a checklist for residents, that is even more challenging. It's a good place to start, but residents, unlike a building, change faster and dramatically. Residents in apartment number 1 and residents in apartment number 2 are going to be different for all of the varieties of reasons, and neither one of those will follow a checklist or a script for any interactions with them. Therefore, we use a framework, kind of like the 5 Ps of customer service. But even that, if you remember and go back to that episode, it's just a framework. It's not a rote checklist. It's a place to start. Then it boils down to all of those other skills that we've got to have so that we identify issues beyond a checklist. One final thought before we close out this particular episode. And by the way, this is part 1. We're going to be talking more about curiosity next and put together a framework, a beginning place on how getting curious looks for our communities. But this final thought, I want you to pause just for a moment and listen to these words by Abigail Adams. This was originally written in 1780. I mean, this is even before fake knowledge, AI was ever thought of, or computers, or cell phone checklists, email, channels, all of those different private messaging apps. All of this didn't exist when Abigail Adams said this. She said, "Learning is not attained by chance. It must be sought for with ardor and attended to with diligence." Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you somewhere. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Maintenance Mindset. I hope you take away ideas that apply to your current and future career goals. Please check out Maintenance Mindset Minute to hear short-form, high-impact, applicable, maintenance-centered information. Whatever you do today, do it with a maintenance mindset. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Visit multifamilymedianetwork.com to learn more about our other industry podcasts, thought pieces, and sponsorship opportunities. I'll see you somewhere.